Hey Retro Gamers. Today on Smashing Bricks, we become 00 agents in the 1997 first-person shooter GoldenEye 007 for the Nintendo 64. Hey, welcome back to Smashing Bricks, a retro gaming podcast. My name is Eddie Inzauto, and today I'm joined by returning guest, Anthony LaBella. Hey man, how's it going, Anthony?
I'm doing well. I'm very, very excited to talk about one of the biggest games from my childhood, so it's going to be a good discussion today.
Yeah, GoldenEye 007 for the Nintendo 64. I'm more hyped for this than I've been for any episode so far. This is episode 13, and we've reached peak hype mode for me personally. I hope that's not spoiling what's to come, but I think everyone.
So I'm gonna guess
knows.
you hated it then, yeah. Okay.
Awful, absolutely awful.
Horrible game. Absolutely horrible game. One of the worst we've ever played.
Yep. Okay. So this could run long. So we're just going to say we know you and we love you. Let's talk about GoldenEye. So a quick overview just to start. What's GoldenEye 007?
Well, GoldenEye was a first-person shooter for the Nintendo 64 that is based on the James Bond movie GoldenEye. I think it came out a couple years before that. And it was released for the N64 in 97, which was a time when there were a lot of first-person shooters on PC, but there weren't really a ton, if any, from what I can remember, that were on consoles. So it was pretty groundbreaking in that sense, and I know it was hugely popular at the time. I knew a lot of people who had played it or would have multiplayer sessions with it, so it was just a really seminal game for the Nintendo 64, and pretty groundbreaking for first-person shooters on consoles specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. GoldenEye really kind of changed a lot in the landscape of first-person shooters and video games in general. And it actually has a lot more interesting story than I ever knew, because I wasn't reading up on it this deeply back in 1997. But
Right.
We've discovered some cool stuff about the game that some of the listeners may know and some may not. So this is a 25-year-old game. It's not the oldest we've done here, but this is among the most recent yet that we've talked about on Smashing Bricks. Like you said, it was August 1997 in North America and Japan, and November 97 in PAL regions for the Nintendo 64. It was developed by Rare, who at the time was a second-party developer for Nintendo. They really got linked up with Nintendo sort of at the end of the Super Nintendo era into the Nintendo 64 era. And it was published by Nintendo themselves. So this was a sort of cooperative effort between Rare, the development house, and Nintendo, the publisher. One of the most interesting aspects of this game's development that I never knew until now was that it was developed by a team that was largely inexperienced in making video games. None of them, except the director, had ever worked on a video game before. Did you know this?
That is wild. I had no idea. You cannot tell from playing the game that that's the case. That is news to me and pretty amazing.
That is shocking. And the director, Martin Hollis, who previously worked on Killer Instinct, the coin-op arcade cabinet before. That was the only thing he had done. He has had some interviews since GoldenEye because, he suddenly became kind of famous as far as video game developers go. And he talked about how he just hired people who were good at what they did, had a love for Bond, and who were enthusiastic. And
Wow.
in their development process, they just kind of went for it. Anything that they came up with, they went for it. And that was partly due to their inexperience because they didn't know, oh, this is going to be super difficult, so let's not try that. So in a way, their inexperience made them more successful, according to Martin Hollis, the director.
Yeah, I guess the ambition makes up for the lack of experience in a good way in this case.
Yeah, the team was only, I think, 11 people. He had a couple of programmers, Mark Edmonds and Steve Ellis, some designers, Duncan Botwood and David Doak, Dr. Doak, artists, Carl Hilton, B. Jones, and Adrian Smith, and 3 composers, Graham Norgate, Grant Kirkhope, and Robin Beanland, who only did the snazzy elevator music. And that's the whole team.
Wow.
That's pretty
What a
small.
small
That's
team.
like that's
Yeah.
Super Nintendo level, or even earlier.
Right, for a 3D game on a console. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it was so early, they didn't even have Nintendo 64 hardware to work with. They started this somewhat blind. So it was a small dev team for the time. They were all hired by Hollis. And Hollis was only hired at Rare initially to network the Silicon Graphics computers as they transitioned over. Because in this time period from Super Nintendo to Nintendo 64, Rare was really focused on this process that they introduced in Donkey Kong Country, and that the Nintendo 64 was also going to utilize this sort of 3-dimensionality added to flat sprites that we saw in those games. And they needed him because he had Unix experience. And then he did some extra programming just for the operating system of the Killer Instinct arcade cabinet. Which is so funny.
Wow.
Later on, he just kind of got really excited about this James Bond project. As early as 1994, November, Rare and Nintendo were discussing a James Bond game, but it wasn't a serious project yet. And Hollis knew about this, so he just went straight to Tim Stamper and said he'd like to lead the project. He said in an interview, he was like, I went to Tim and I said, that sounds cool. I'd love to do that. And Tim was like, okay. And that was the whole thing. And at the time, it was suggested that this game be another 2D platformer for the Super Nintendo because of Rare's success with those Donkey Kong Country games.
Oh.
But Hollis said, well, I'd kind of rather do it on the Ultra 64 as a 3D shooter. And then they were like, okay, let's do that.
Again, the ambition pays off.
Yeah,
Again, side-scrolling, let's go 3D and a first-person shooter.
Exactly. Dude was like, no, I want to do something really cool.
Right.
That was basically the idea, was he wanted to do something awesome. And he was interested in the trajectory of video gaming at the time, as we all were, I think. He was inspired by a few different things, one being the 1994 game Virtua Cop, which was a rail shooter. So he had the idea of making sort of a shooter like that with reloading and reactive hit animations and penalties for killing innocent people and adding an aiming system. Of course, he was inspired by Doom, first-person shooter that everyone copied at the time. And then sort of partway through development, Super Mario 64 came out, and he took influence from that too, with the objectives per stage, the way that you used to jump into the pictures in Super Mario 64, and each time you would have a different objective. He got the idea, oh, let's put a bunch of different objectives into all of our stages, but they'll be all available in the one run through. You don't have to keep going back in. So as
I
we
didn't
find
realize
out,
that was the inspiration. Huh.
yeah, that's where that came from. And of course, John Woo films with all the action, bullet holes in everything, cartridges flying everywhere, explosions, detritus flying everywhere because everything blew up in GoldenEye. And, on this sort of foundation that he presented in a 9-page design document, that's where they started to build the game. And
Wow.
he mentioned that the very first line of this design document was, "The game will be similar to Virtua Cop in terms of gameplay." Well, that certainly changed a bit, right?
Right.
It's so interesting to hear how it started. They started development in January 1995. And remember, this game came out in August of 1997. So, and the Nintendo 64 came out in September of 96, if I remember correctly. So this was all happening before the Nintendo 64 was launched, as I said. They didn't have Nintendo 64 hardware to work with. They didn't even know for sure how the Nintendo 64 would be controlled. They used SGI Onyx workstations to do the majority of the early work, and they worked on both a standard first-person shooter design as we know it today and as we saw in the final game, as well as a rail shooter in those early days of development. Because again, they didn't know what they were going to be capable of as far as moving in 3D space. And if you look at the video presented in the 1995 Space World demo, it was on rails. It was showing the camera moving along a set path. I think it was in the silo with the M16 gun. I remember it. I think it was also part of the promotional VHS tape that Nintendo Power sent to subscribers, because I have some sort of vivid memory of this 3-second clip of GoldenEye.
Wow.
So yeah, they built sort of 2 early directions for the game that they ultimately went the way they went with GoldenEye as a regular sort of first-person shooter. And they used the Sega Saturn controller for early playtesting because they had nothing else, which is nuts. Another thing that Hollis mentioned later on was that they took this unusual sort of anti-game design approach to designing the game. He had them build levels simply as interesting spaces first, just like areas that he thought would be fun to play a game in. And then later they added the characters, the objectives, and even the start and end points were added way later. He also compiled a full list of James Bond gadgets. I think it was around 40. And later on, they figured out how, when, and where to insert them into the gameplay and the narrative where they would make sense to move the levels along. So it was very free-flowing, and you see that eventually in the gameplay where it kind of feels like you're in a real place and you have to go here and there and all around. Each level feels like a small open world, which I kind of didn't realize, but it makes complete sense.
Yeah, if that was the design philosophy, then they started with really open spaces and had to find the interesting things to put in after. So, yeah, that makes sense that the levels play like that.
Yeah, and because they didn't have a really concrete idea of what they were working with, they started by doing a lot of conceptual design in the first year of development. Because remember, this was in development for 2.5 years. So the programmer, Mark Edmonds, built an original game engine for the game in order to apply all of their art assets to the 3D models and data structures in the Nintendo 64 hardware or whatever, make it work so that they could actually put their stuff in the game. B. Jones did the characters, mapped out all the characters that would then be applied to the polygons. Adrian Smith worked on explosions and muzzle flashes and all special effects. And Carl Hilton modeled the set blueprints that the team got from visiting the actual movie studios from the movie. And then later, those models were built out into 3D worlds primarily by Duncan Botwood. Nuts. David Doak worked on level design and a lot of the kind of revolutionary AI scripting at the time that lent the game a stealthy approach, if you wanted to do it that way. And they built that game. They made the game, and about 6 months before it was finished, because they were kind of late, Rare gave them a little bit extra budget and said, bring somebody else on. They had another programmer who came in and helped out, and then with 6 months left, he was essentially assigned to build a completely separate game, which was the multiplayer. And they did that in secret because it would have never been approved, and they had to do it and then finally show it to, the heads of the studio in its complete form. The game was not going to have multiplayer. They originally thought it would. They had to cut it out because they were delayed, and then they secretly worked on it and put it back in when the game was basically finished.
What a wild story for one of the more iconic aspects of that game, that it was done in secret right before release.
I know.
Again, just caution to the wind design in this game.
Most people, I think, would say that the multiplayer was the main selling point of the game.
Right.
And I think that might be objectively true.
Yeah. At the time, I feel like that was what everyone talked about. Or even just in hindsight, thinking about the nostalgic piece of it, that's where a lot of those memories come from for people. So that's just amazing to me that it was such a quick turnaround on what is perhaps the biggest mark that game made on the gaming public.
Yeah. They even put the other James Bond actors in the game for multiplayer, but MGM shot it down. They said, no, Sean Connery will demand a lot of money, and then so will the others when they hear Sean Connery got paid. So they said, okay, Pierce Brosnan's already, on the license because he's in the movie. We'll stick with that, and we'll just add a bunch of other characters. So they made this game, and the whole game is 12 megabytes. I love to say how big the games are because it's hilarious to me. 12 megabytes.
Right.
Oh my god, that's like, what is that, 10 floppy disks? Something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so that's basically the history. It came out in August of 97, and it was released to rave reviews, etc. But what were some games that were out at the time? So, like you said, the majority of the FPS games were on PC at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the FPS genre was still very young. It was essentially only 3 years since the granddaddy of the first-person shooter, as everyone has come to agree, Wolfenstein 3D, released in 1992. They started making GoldenEye in 1995. Obviously, it took a little while, but that's when they started, 3 years after that. But after that, we had Virtua Cop in 1994, which was a different sort of game, but it was still the inspiration for GoldenEye. Doom came out in 1993 with the death matches, and Doom 2 in 94, System Shock in 94, the Heretic, Hexen 2 trilogy in 94, 95, and 97, same year as GoldenEye. Tons of Doom clones that were mostly terrible. Star Wars Dark Forces in 1995, Duke Nukem 3D in 1996, and Quake. It's kind of the real big boy in 1996 as far as real 3D shooters go. But as far as console first-person shooters, really there was nothing. The only original console first-person shooter was Turok the Dinosaur Hunter, also on the Nintendo 64, that came out in March of 97, same year. It probably started development after GoldenEye.
Right.
And, Doom 64 came out in April of 97 also. That was an original title for a console, but it was still based on the PC title. That Star Wars game, Dark Forces, was ported to PS1 in 96, and Hexen and Duke 3D also came to all the 5th generation consoles in 1997 as well. Quake came to the Saturn in 1997 and N64 in 1998. And that's it. That's really all that was there as far as first-person shooters. So GoldenEye was very early as far as first-person shooters, and we'll come to find out it did a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah, and thinking about how all of those games were Nintendo 64, just think about Nintendo's journey since then, that the first really big console first-person shooters, Turok, Doom 64, GoldenEye were all Nintendo games, is interesting to think about.
Yeah, well, they actually designed it for that in a way. You know, they probably saw all these first-person shooters becoming popular in the early 90s on PC, and they said, how can we make this console ready for these? They put a gun in their controller, right? The middle handle was just a gun handle with the analog stick above it. Interestingly, it was your left hand, which changed a lot in the years to follow. But the expectations within the critical community were incredibly low for GoldenEye.
Huh.
Apparently, I would assume they knew that it was sort of a green team, or at least there were ways of finding that out if you're a journalist. It was a movie tie-in. Historically terrible movie tie-ins, right? So a lot of critics did not give this a lot of attention when it was in its infancy, in like the preview stage at the shows when it's on display. You know what it's like. Like when we go to E3 and there are games that aren't out yet and they're showing them off, and you can stop and check them out, or maybe not. So critics always thought that this was not going to be a good game, and then all of a sudden we have an average Metacritic score of 96 out of 100. Wow. Edge 9 out of 10. EGM 9.38 out of 10. Game Informer 8.5 out of 10. Game Revolution A-. GameSpot 9.8 out of 10. IGN 9.7 out of 10. N64 Magazine 94%. Next Gen 5 out of 5. Nintendo Power 9 out of 10. Gaming Age 9.1 out of 10. So it exceeded expectations. I would
Clearly,
say. Yeah. Sold 8 million copies as far as the report at around the turn of the century. I forget what it was.
Yeah, which made it the third best-selling game on the N64, beating out Ocarina of Time, which I know many consider the greatest game of all time, if not one of the best.
Yeah, and in the United States, it was actually the second most of all time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think it was behind Mario Kart worldwide, but ahead of Mario Kart in the US.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge comparatively to some of those big Nintendo franchises.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you think about the money they made, the budget was $2 million, but they made $250 million in sales. So this brand new team, throwing caution to the wind, devil may care attitude in terms of game development, makes up their money and well more with the kind of sales they were getting. Mm-hmm. And Nintendo didn't expect it, because if you think about it, the GoldenEye film came out, was it 2 years before this game even came out?
Yeah. So it's old already.
Yeah. It's already old. It's a movie that people have already seen in theaters 2 years prior. It's out of sight, out of mind. So they didn't even make enough carts for the game. So it came out in 97. It sold more in 98 and more in 99. Actually, more than both 97 and 98.
Combined. Nuts.
That is incredibly nuts.
It went on to win a bunch of awards. It won the BAFTA Interactive Entertainment Games Award in 98, with Rare winning the Best UK Developer. It won numerous awards at the AIAS, the Interactive Achievement Awards. It was the Game of the Year, essentially, the Console Game of the Year, the Console Action Game of the Year, and Outstanding Achievement in Software Engineering, as well as being nominated for Outstanding Achievement in Art and Graphics and Outstanding Achievement in Interactive Design. EGM gave it Most Addictive Game and the Best Movie to Game Adaptation in their 1998 Buyer's Guide, and Game of the Year in their Editor's Choice Awards.
High praise.
So, yeah. Talk about exceeding expectations.
Yeah.
And what's funny is that an interview I read with Martin Hollis, he actually said that they had no idea what the expectations were in their little bubble of work, because I didn't mention this, but Hollis himself said he averaged an 80-hour work week over the entire 2.5 years of the project, sometimes going up to 100 hours a week. And so did a lot of the people on the team. They were so dedicated and so talented, even though they had done nothing before, and obviously it showed. So these guys were working so hard. They were in their own world. They had no idea that nobody expected much from them, which was probably ultimately a good thing, because they did work so hard and they did produce something amazing. So when they released it, they were just like, I hope people like it. And then boom, all this praise.
That's incredible. Yeah, especially with such a small team that you can see why all those hours are being put in. That no more than a dozen people worked on it?
Yeah. As far as its legacy, it's really interesting. Usually a game this big, and this has been sort of a theme in this game's history since then, is everyone's always wanted a remake, but it never really got one. 2005, GoldenEye Source was made and put into beta, which is a total conversion mod of the Source SDK, the Source engine that powered Counter-Strike and Half-Life 2. And that became official in 2010. So that was just a multiplayer only kind of reimagining of the game. Then there was this XBLA, Xbox Live Arcade remaster in 2006 to 2008-ish that was never released because Microsoft had bought Rare in 2002, and of course GoldenEye should be remade for Xbox Live Arcade. Why wouldn't you do that? So they started working on it. They figured, yeah, we bought Rare, we can make this game. They realized they had to get some sort of licensing agreement from Nintendo because Nintendo was the publisher. And they also had to get a licensing go-ahead from MGM, the movie studio. And this just never happened. And it was probably because of Nintendo.
Yeah, I think not a bad assumption.
So they basically made this entire game and never released it. And I think it was revealed in 2016, and then a full playthrough showed up in 2019. And then now it's on YouTube because people were able to download it. It was uploaded to some dark sites that you can go and get things like this on. And I watched this, and it looks pretty cool. It's just a really high-res upgrade to the original game. It looks like it plays exactly like the original, just with all this remastering done. Looks super cool. Okay. I wish I could play it.
Yeah, I'll have to look at that.
So people knew about that, and then finally, just this year, a couple months ago, January, the game was released on the Xbox Series S and Series X and the Nintendo Switch to sort of mixed reception. I think because the Xbox one doesn't have multiplayer and the Nintendo Switch one doesn't let people update the controls to sort of modern FPS controls. So people aren't super happy with it.
It's a strange dichotomy there because, yeah, as you said, I believe the Xbox version, you can kind of give it modern controls, whereas the Switch version, which I was playing just yesterday, trying it out, is entirely accurate to how it was on an S64 in terms of controls, which felt interesting. We'll get into that later, but it's just strange how they're two very different versions. And then the Switch version has the online multiplayer. If you can, find a friend who also has it, you can play split screen online. So
I will have questions about that Switch version if that's what you played. That's exciting.
Yeah, definitely.
And the other thing is the same team was asked to make another game, a sequel, based on Tomorrow Never Dies, which was the next Bond film with Pierce Brosnan that came out, I think, the same year as GoldenEye, the video game. Like they took so long, the next movie was
Right.
already coming out. So it actually got a little boost from that, but they declined to do that because they were a little bonded out. So they wanted to work on something original, and they made Perfect Dark, which then came
Of
out in
course.
2000 for the Nintendo 64. And it was one of the most advanced games released for the Nintendo 64, requiring
Yeah.
the memory expansion pack and really pushing that to the limits. Okay, now, the moment we've all been waiting for. Tell me about your history with GoldenEye.
Yeah, so GoldenEye came out when I was very young. GoldenEye came out when I was 6 years old. I was born in 91, so this was 97. And a lot of the ways I consumed games back then when I was that young was watching my brother play them. And then once I got a little bit
The
older, I'd
classic
start
brother
playing them.
story.
Right. Older brothers playing the game. I'm watching, eyes wide going, oh, this is the coolest thing ever. So we had an N64. I feel like we got one for a Christmas maybe before that. And my brother would play some games on N64 and I would watch. And I remember he got GoldenEye 007 and I'd watch him play it. And yeah, there's guns and there's violence. But back then, my parents felt I was mature enough to watch with my brother. So I'd watch him play GoldenEye, and it was something entirely new to me. I definitely remember Super Mario 64 being the really mind-blowing game that I saw on there. But GoldenEye was right behind it because first-person shooter wasn't anything I knew about. We did not have a computer that could play games, or not a lot of games. We had Roller Coaster Tycoon or SimCity in the 90s. But nothing like GoldenEye, nothing 3D like that. So that was also mind-blowing, just seeing that perspective for something action-based, unlike a Super Mario 64, which is very vibrant and kid-friendly. Here was this more action romp based on this famous movie that I had sort of heard about, and that kind of blew my mind too, that I hadn't seen anything like this before. So I'd watch him play, and then I'd say probably 98, 99, when it was selling even more, I would start actually trying to play. I'd start playing some games with my brother. So I had seen him play through the whole single player campaign, but then we started dabbling with the multiplayer. And some of my fondest video game memories are playing GoldenEye with my brother. And we would just play the silliest game modes and the silliest maps. I remember we would do the slaps only mode. We would choose it so we only had mines. We would just throw proximity mines everywhere, or we'd only have rocket launchers. I distinctly remember hiding in the bathroom a lot in that one, I think it's the facility level, and we would try to find each other. So if we were hiding, we would shoot a rocket into the bathroom or try to go on I think there was the vents in that level, so you can get in the vents and then drop down into the stall. So there was so much laughter.
Spawn points.
Yeah, you would spawn in the vent. So there was just so much laughter and silliness around that helped us really bond. Oh, I didn't even mean to make that pun, but we bonded together. I walked right into that one. Okay. We bonded together a lot playing GoldenEye. So I have really, really fond memories because of that. And then I tried the single player when I was younger too. And I remember thinking it was pretty challenging for me because I would have been, 8 or 9 at the time. And I don't think I ever finished the campaign, but I remember getting really far in the single player. And I remember enjoying that a lot too. I know the multiplayer is the really iconic aspect that was really influential and was kind of the biggest discussion around that game at the time. But I remember thinking that the single player campaign was also really cool, and there were all those objectives, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the level design and structure. But I remember really enjoying that too, and thinking that was a great part of the game as well. And then we'll get to sound later, but the sound of this game is maybe the thing I remember most. If you were to ask me to think about anything about GoldenEye, before I'd even say the multiplayer, I would say the sound of GoldenEye 007. Just the almost cartoonish gun ricochet sound that you get. And that soundtrack is just incredible. It's got it's got the deep bass and the almost like hip hop or R&B beats in it. It's just it sounds incredible, and the reload sound is probably top 3 video game sounds I remember in my life. Just the sound when you reload a gun is right up there, probably top 3 sounds. Probably that, the Metroid pickup sound, and maybe hitting the coin block in Mario. It's probably those 3 for me that I think of first when I think of video game sound. So just the sound design and the soundtrack are also incredibly iconic to me and make me think back to my early childhood. So it's just something that makes me feel very happy and makes me think about my brother when I think about this game. So it's very impactful in that sense, in that nostalgic sense.
That is awesome. That is such a good collection of memories around a game. I love it.
Yeah.
I too
How about you?
have tons of memories surrounding this game. So this game came out right around my 13th birthday, which is perfect.
That's a great sweet spot. Yes.
That is the perfect time in a young boy's life to play video games and to love all the things that you're into and remember them for life. And this is no exception. This was my favorite game at the time. And I was the Nintendo 64 kid among all my different groups of friends because I believed in Nintendo. I didn't have a PlayStation right away, and I was all about this game when it came out because I did see that early VHS tape that Nintendo Power sent out, and I saw this game in that tiny clip, and I said, whoa, that looks cool. Guns. Weird. And I hadn't had much experience with first-person shooters at this time either, except I played Doom on the computer at my mom's job in like the back room. And that was fine.
I love that that's where you played it.
Yeah.
Your mom's job in the back room.
So that was fine, but this was a whole new thing. This was 3D for real with polygon backgrounds, lots more movement, vertical aiming. It looked amazing at the time. I also remember getting this classified information folder, I think probably also from Nintendo, that was a little preview booklet of all of the aspects of GoldenEye. It must have come out in early 97 because it showed a lot of the stuff, and that got me so hyped. I have a vivid picture, like an actual visual memory of reading it in my mom's car at the gas station when it came from in the mail at the post office. Like I can visualize the entire scene. This was very, very core memory realm.
Yeah.
And then getting the game, I played it like crazy. I played the single player. I beat every level on every difficulty. I got all of the secret codes by beating the levels on their specific difficulties in a set amount of time. I then introduced the game to all my friends. We played 4-player split screen, death matches constantly. It was the main game that we played. I became so good at this game. I used to play 3 versus 1 with all my friends on all the different multiplayer modes. We would do, License to Kill, one shot only, the man with the golden gun, and they would all try to keep the golden gun away from me. We did when we did the mode that had proximity mines and especially remote mines, was like I was a god at remote mines. Whenever remote mines came up, people were like, no, forget this.
We're skipping this one.
Master of screen watching, looking at everyone else's screen. Oh, of course.
Screen. Oh, gosh. Yeah, the screen watching of the time. Yes.
Yes, on a split screen video game. I don't know.
You can hide from no one.
Yeah, now we have multiplayer over the internet only. But couch multiplayer, you have to have the screen divided into quadrants. So I'm up there in the top left, but the majority of the time I'm looking at the other 3, and you're going to die when you come right around that corner. And we played it all the time for like 3 years. There's so much I could say, so many little memories. Oh, we used to make up little songs to go with the music.
Oh, I love that.
One that I always remember is, I think it was the temple. I would love doing the temple multiplayer level with grenade launchers because it had those holes in the walls high up and you could shoot from one
Oh
chamber
yeah.
through them into some of the other chambers for like kills out of the blue. And it had the music. We would sing Granadas Lanches, Granadas Lanches. So many songs like that. We're kids, you know, but these things stick in
Right.
my memory. Yeah, and then I had one friend who went to school in the next town, but he was like part of this friend group, and he was like the king of that friend group over there, like separate group of kids. And then we had this sort of showdown one time where we went through each and every one of the weapon sets in multiplayer, and we split. I think it was like 6-6 on each of the weapon sets, and there was no like true king of GoldenEye. And then I proceeded to be terrible at every first-person shooter ever made after that when we switched over to dual stick controls.
Yes, it's built for a certain a certain type.
Yeah, it's so funny. So much more to say about this, but let's move on to our most recent play, which we just had. Where to start? So, did you have fun replaying this game?
I did have fun replaying this game, and I honestly wasn't sure. I thought, especially with 3D games, right? The way that old 3D games age, it's very different from 2D games because I think a lot of 3D games are very much built on, at least at this time, right? Are built very much on the groundbreaking technology. And they're not maybe as mechanics driven as an older game or more 2D focused game. So then, old Metroids hold up well, or, old side-scrollers, but then older 3D games can be a bit of a struggle to go back to. So I was honestly not sure if I would have a ton of fun going back to GoldenEye or if it would be more of a nostalgia trip, right? And I honestly think a lot of this game does hold up. I think we'll probably go into more detail, but just the level design and maybe more the objective design and the way the difficulty is handled, I think really feels fresh and interesting, even in the year 2023.
Yeah.
And just the feeling of being a secret agent, I think still exists if you play this game now, which it's a James Bond video game. If you think of the objective list of what a James Bond video game needs, I would say feeling like James Bond needs to be in there at the top. And I did feel like I was a secret agent when I was playing this game, and I was really impressed that aspect of the game still held up all these years later. So, I'll have criticisms we'll go over as we go through, but overall, I did really enjoy playing through the game again.
Yeah, me too. I saw a lot of things that now looking back are kind of ridiculous and, like sort of quote unquote bad. But I also realized that at the same time, for 1997, they were awesome.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of the sort of like AI movement and stuff, and some of the way the world was filled out. But what you said about the missions and the objectives in the missions,
yeah,
I realized that that's still so good, and it really comes together, especially in the 00 agent difficulty, because the objectives all tie together narratively, so you can see what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how each objective leads to the next thing that you have to do. Like, you'll put a data transfer module on a thing, and then you'll go somewhere else and use the computer that relies on that data transfer gadget having been placed to send information, or you'll set up this other thing and then go to somewhere else in the level that relies on that, and you'll put a tracker on a helicopter because that's going to the next level, and it'll be there, and that's how you got there. And it's amazing. I still don't really know what the overall story of either GoldenEye the movie or GoldenEye 007 the game is.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really spend the time to read all of the files that precede each
the dossiers
of the 20 levels. But if you wanted to, there is a pretty well written out story there from all these briefings you get from
Hmm.
your team, all the main players in the Bond universe, Q and Moneypenny and M. It really fleshes that out to make it feel, like you said, like you are James Bond, and you absolutely do. And it's really special the way that Hollis and the team started with those gadgets, because I didn't realize
Yeah.
it that much, or maybe I did at the time, but it's been a long time, 25 years. But playing
Hmm.
through it again, those gadgets are in every single level, and
Yeah.
they let you do cool and different stuff that was never part of first person shooters in the early 90s. Those were Doom clones, those were corridor shooters. I still have never played System Shock. I have a feeling it's wildly different from all those, but the
It is.
majority,
It's yeah.
the majority of those games were just run through, shoot everything, open the next door, find the key card, get to the end. Cool. This was fun.
Right. The puzzle aspect of those games was very much key based, right?
Hmm.
Figure out the map, right? There's still you're kind of doing the internal mapping to find the secret doors or where the key goes. But that was kind of the level of puzzle of those games, even if they were trying to break up the combat. Whereas the level of puzzle or the mechanics that aren't distinctly shooting in this game are way more engaging, I think, than what a lot of those games back then were doing.
Yeah, and I mean, let's talk about stealth. There's real stealth in this game that is not prescribed. It's not something that is set up for you to just fall in line with. It's something for you to strategize about and
Hmm.
and execute on your own, to pick a route based on where the guards are, to duck behind things, to only shoot once or twice. Because here's something. Did you know that in this game there is a timer related to the sound that you make and levels of sound attached to each gun? So if you're using your silenced PP7 and you shoot once, there's, say, just for example, you have a loudness score of 1, and after a certain
Hmm.
number of seconds, it decreases back to 0. And you could shoot a second time, and it goes up another 1, and then decreases. And only after you reach a certain loudness threshold do guards nearby realize that something is going on. And then they will move
Wow. I
based
did
on
not know that.
sound in a
Huh.
particular radius. And with each shot, the radius gets a little bit bigger. But if you
Huh. That's
wait,
really
the
intricate.
radius
Okay.
shrinks. So just through that, the game design encourages you to use the quieter guns instead of the more
Yeah.
powerful guns, because obviously the little pistol is weaker than an AK-47,
Hmm.
and it incentivizes you to fire as few shots as possible,
Yeah.
to go for
So then you want to go
headshots.
for headshots. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And that's another thing. The hitboxes that are specific to body parts, you can shoot them in the head for an instant kill. This is one of
Yeah.
the early games that had headshots because it had full polygon enemies. Or you could
Right.
shoot them in the leg and they stop and they grab their leg. Or you shoot them in the hand and they drop their gun. Things like that. You can shoot them in the butt and they hop up and down. You remember that one?
Yeah, that's great. I love doing that.
So using those other baked in mechanics to your advantage was really important and really fun and very new and very exciting.
Yeah.
And now seeing it again, I was remembering, oh yeah, this was really ahead of its time.
Yeah, I forgot about that kind of groundbreaking piece of it. The fact that you have the individual limbs that you can focus on. You can bring up the reticule to aim at the head. I guess when I think back on GoldenEye, those things don't stand out to me, but playing it again now, I realized, whoa, if you think about this in 97, that's really revolutionary that you have that level of control in how you're going to play and how you're going to aim when you're doing combat, so that there are multiple ways to approach it. Because we'll probably talk more about it now, but I'm the kind of person who's terrible at stealth, just really, really bad. And I always do stealth to a degree, but I think the game also gives you the tools to play it in a louder, heavier way and still manage to get through the objectives and get through the level. So I love the player freedom in that sense that, yes, James Bond should be stealthy and here are your tools, but if it goes sideways, there's still a way to deal with it in that way too.
Yeah, it gives you that choice right away. You get the AK-47, the KF-7 Soviet, actually, right away. I think the first person you kill drops it. So from the first person you kill, you have the option to continue with your stealth silenced PP7 or immediately switch to an assault rifle.
Right.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And that gun is not like the next little tiny step up. It's like a full power. It's one of the strongest weapons.
Yeah, you could play through the whole game with that thing and manage. Absolutely.
That's another thing I like is that the enemies are human beings. They have a set amount of health, let's say, and it's the same throughout the game for the most part. Some of them will have like body armor, and the amount of hits that they can absorb goes up with difficulty level, but it's pretty uniform from the beginning to the end as far as like agent mode goes. And then it's uniform when you go up to secret agent from beginning to end, and it's uniform in double agent, which is cool because they then increase the difficulty of each scenario, of each little encounter within the larger level. They'll make a more complex grouping of enemies that you have to deal with, like from room to room.
Right.
Which obviously I was not analyzing as a 13-year-old, but seeing it now,
yeah. Well, I was, remember, 8 or 9.
Yeah.
Hey, big bro, check out this enemy AI. What do you think?
Yeah. So it was really good. And so speaking of more of the enemy AI, they had scripting where these people, the enemies in the game, they were trying to live, right? They were trying to do things. They were reacting to the world they were in. If you shot someone and they saw that person get shot, they knew that you were there. That was new.
Yeah.
They would decide either to attack you, to hide, to preserve their life, to roll, or if they could, they would run to a nearby alarm to trip the alarm and set it off and then bring in all these other enemies to come and, fight this intruder. And seeing, a room where you have a few guards and 2 of them start shooting at you while the 3rd one runs to turn the alarm on, that's really cool because you have to figure out, am I going to shoot these guys who are shooting at me, or should I shoot the guy who just ran toward the alarm, get him first, and then shoot these other 2?
Yeah. Or even, if I'm correct, at least on some of the levels, you have the alarms that you can shoot before they even get to it.
Yep.
Yeah. So then you have that aspect of it too. Yeah. It's all of them, right?
Yeah. You can go around and preemptively eliminate alarms. And that's actually a big point, is the very first level. One of the basic objectives is neutralize all alarms.
Yeah.
So it immediately teaches you that the guards will be activating these alarms throughout the game. So this is an objective in the first level. You know that alarms are important. They're a core part of how the enemies will try to kill you. You have to deal with them. And you can use them throughout the game to maintain your stealthiness.
Yeah, what a smart way to tutorialize that.
Yeah. And that includes, later on, they have automatic alarms, the ones that are set off by the video cameras on a swivel. So you have to see those, shoot them without them seeing you, or within a certain amount of time of them seeing you, before they trip the alarm automatically.
And that's really another one that's an objective, right? The camera one, I forget what level it is, but I think that's also one when you first see the cameras, that's one of the objectives is to destroy all the security cameras, much like the first level with the sound alarms.
Yeah, I think the text they use is destroy surveillance, something like that, right?
Yes.
I think it might be the first time you go in the bunker.
Yeah, that sounds right. It might be Bunker 1.
which is also cool. They reuse two of the levels,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them is set in daytime and then in nighttime, and the other one is in a half-built state and then a fully built state when you come
Right.
back,
Yeah,
which is pretty cool.
that is cool.
Also, continuing with the stealth line of thinking, something I learned in my research of the game this time that I kind of knew somewhat instinctually from playing the game, but didn't know explicitly, is that enemies were designed with an AI that made windows opaque to them. They can't see through the majority of windows in the game, and it's done on purpose. They did that to give you the sense of being this secret agent who's sneaking around and being able to watch your enemies and get the drop on them like you're a secret agent.
I see.
And Hollis said, obviously this isn't realistic, but it makes for a really good game. And that's totally true.
Right, because there's limitations to the stealth they can implement in a first-person shooter, right? It's, crouching and leaning against cover, right? That's going to be something they can't maybe fully integrate. So it might not be realistic, but it's the way they can incorporate that level of stealth in the game and reinforce it. So I think that was a really smart decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was so like such a revelation to read Hollis describing that. I was like, oh my God, you're so right. That is what happens. It's nuts. They put a lot of thought into the game because, as he said in one of these interviews, was they would get ideas, and because they didn't have experience, they would say, that sounds cool. Let's do that.
Right.
Okay. No limits.
Sure, throw it in there. Why not? We're already working 80 hours this week. Let's do it.
That's crazy. So they did those things. They put really cool scenarios throughout the game. There are so many times where you get into these high intensity situations where you go to complete an objective maybe, and now an alarm is triggered and you have to get out and go through a bunch of guards, or the end of the level comes and now you have to beat a timer, or all kinds of different things like this that really get you hyped, along with that music going. Really exciting.
Yeah, very dynamic.
Totally. And there are moments like when you come across rooms where there are hostages and one of the bad guys is pointing a gun directly at some civilian, and you come into the room and all of a sudden you're faced with this and you're like, oh, I got to react. And you have to shoot just the guy holding the other person at gunpoint. And you have to do that a few times. There are hacking sequences. There's protecting some comrade, someone doing something for you. There's Natalia, who comes with you through the jungle and shoots people. Oh man, there's so many different things. So many interesting scenarios thrown into this game at every turn.
Yeah, and again, it's because you're James Bond, right? James Bond does not run through and shoot everyone and murder thousands and thousands of people. He kills some people. He does secret agent stuff, and I think that level of dynamic level design, where lots of different things are happening, escort missions, shooting a bunch of enemies who are coming at you because an alarm set off, planting the thing on the monitor to hack it, making a copy of a key, just all these different things again are going back to that really important aspect of feeling like 007. And I think they really nail that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay. So we're really praising this game. What are some...
Can I bring up the AI? Watching them roll will never not be hilarious. They look like they haven't worked out in years. And it's just the slowest roll you've ever seen. They're really trying, but it looks so silly every time. I love it.
Yeah, I actually wrote this down. Silly AI dodges. I wrote rolls with exclamation points.
Right.
I never thought they were good back then, but I didn't think they were bad at the time. But looking at them now,
it's charming.
They're just ridiculous.
It's bad, but it's charming.
Yeah. Sometimes my favorite one that I did remember was really dumb back in the day was the guy would be standing there straight and then do a 2-foot hop to the side.
Yes.
That was always one
Oh,
of
it's
my
so
favorite
good.
ones.
Right.
And also
Yeah.
the roll, if you shoot them while they're rolling, they'll fully stand up to do their I just got killed animation
The death
from a standing
animation.
position.
Yeah.
Really funny. A lot of like
Yeah.
silly AI
Some good humor in there,
routines.
yeah.
But you know what? This 9-person team or 11 whatever it was, they did the motion capture for the game because who else was going to do it? They don't have actors that they hire
Wow.
to put in green screen suits. They had an
Yeah.
early motion capture machine where they were connected via wires to the machine while doing the motions. And in interviews, they've said, yeah, this was not easy because we may try to do something and yank the cord and pull the whole computer off the
Sure.
desk.
Oh,
And it was done in like this hot room. Oh, man. It was really quite an effort
yeah,
to
that's
get these
incredible.
motion captures in.
And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but are some of the faces of enemies? Is it some or all are the developers, or am I making that up? I feel like I've heard that before. That
A
some of
lot
the
of them
faces printed on
absolutely are.
there.
I don't know if it's
Yeah.
all of
Okay.
them, but well, obviously some of them have masks and whatever. But
Yeah.
a bunch of them, if not the majority of them, are the faces of the different team
Right.
members. And one of
That's
them is
great.
even named Dr. Doak in the second level.
Yes, you mentioned
It's
that
named
earlier,
after
right?
David Doak, one of the designers.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's such a cool little tidbit.
Yeah, so on the graphics, we said that they were very good for the time, but they're also like a little rudimentary, right?
Hmm.
They took assets, like flat art assets, and like stuck them on polygons and wrapped them around the polygon and like made these
Yeah.
faces that were weirdly warped. And they look a little
Yeah.
funky today. And people
They
will
do. They
trash
look very
talk them.
funky.
But back in the day, I was like, wow, I see a face. It's like, that's
Right, you
enough.
can see a
I see a
face, yeah.
face.
And it looks somewhat realistic for the time.
Yeah. Previously, we had what? We had Mario. He was just made of polygons. He was a cartoon. Or we had
Yeah, I was
Cloud
about to say
Strife.
cartoonish.
He
Yeah,
was just a bunch of polygons, a pointy nose, and we
right.
had those types of designs for characters. This, we had a somewhat photorealistic image of a face, just
Hmm.
kind of weirdly put on the polygon.
Yeah, like a mask has been pulled back over the front of their face to
Hmm.
create the effect.
And I mean, it's a big deal to even have polygon backgrounds. As I kind of alluded to earlier, a lot of the early games were kind of built on semi 3D, sort of
Hmm.
flat backgrounds that did like scrolling effects and parallax effects to give you the illusion of 3D. And then
Right.
there was like Quake, which had real 3D, and this had real 3D.
Hmm.
And then it had some flat objects, of course. But it was a good combination, I thought, for the time. But
Oh,
also, some
definitely.
things were just weird. Like, you would look at a foreground object and you're like, is that 3D? Is that just a flat thing that looks different depending on what angle I'm looking at it at?
Right.
And some of the things you would shoot, everything would explode, first of all.
Yes,
Like
crates, wooden crate explosion.
a locker in the locker room, explosion.
Yeah, explosion.
So weird. And then once they exploded, they turned into like burnt paper.
Right, just black burnt remnants.
Thin, paper thin. You could like
Yeah.
kind of see inside them like origami. Um,
Yeah.
okay. That's what it was at the time.
Right.
It's funny though.
It doesn't age well. Just, I mean,
Yeah.
at the time, yes, this was impressive. I feel like it's true of a lot of N64 games, of all the old consoles, even the
Mhm.
3D ones, PlayStation 1. It's just the N64 ones, it could be hard to look at nowadays. And I definitely thought while I was playing this that, yeah, this does not hold up at all visually to me. Just, you need the context of when it was and what it was doing. Because without that, I think it does look very, very poor. I think
Mhm.
it's just the faces, like you said, are warped and very flat geometry in spots, and yeah, just the lack of detail in some spots. So
Mm-hmm.
I think you need the context to get past how it looks nowadays.
Yeah. One level that I always thought was bad, that I thought looked bad, that wasn't fun to play through, and that I was reminded of this time is Statue
Hmm.
Park.
Oh
It's
my
just
god. Well,
polygons piled on the
oh,
ground.
I don't. I always, when I was a kid, and even playing it now, I just get hopelessly lost in statue. It's pretty large, and you have the landmarks of the statues, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it just all, and I guess it does go back to the visuals. It feels like a visual mess, and I have no idea where I'm going, and I take way longer than I need to on this level. I really don't like the way it's designed, just in terms of where you have to go for the objectives, and that the ground and just the general area looks very similar if you don't have the landmarks in front of you.
Hmm.
So I just felt like out of all the levels, it's the one I always get hopelessly lost in, including when I played it this time.
Yeah, I never liked that level. But I remember getting lost in it similarly early on, but at this point it's burned into my memory kind of which way to go, just because
Yeah.
I did play through every single level with the intention of doing sort of the speed run to get the cheats, and I'm pretty sure
Oh,
that one
sure.
was one of the most difficult ones. I think it was really fast. But yeah, that one was funky. And in other levels, I was noticing this time that there are a lot of empty rooms, just empty
Yeah.
areas. Especially, I really started to notice it on the surface level, the outdoor snowy level with the
Oh, the
little
snowy
huts.
one.
You would
Yeah. Uh
walk into
huh.
one of these bungalows, and it was literally an empty rectangle, nothing in it
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah, you're right. That's true.
And in a lot of the other buildings too.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Huh.
um, let me just look at some of my chicken scratch here. I wrote speed, aspect, emphasized. What was it? I don't know what I was trying to say there. Maybe it had to do with the speed running. Statue Park, ugly polygons. Okay. So from visuals, we should come back to sound. You were talking about sound earlier, and I wanted to jump in, but I saved it for now. The very first thing on my notes here says the music is legend. Wait for it. Dairy.
Yes.
I
Oh,
wrote
it so
facility,
is.
Siberia, the surface, the bunker, the silo. All of them are just
Iconic.
killer tracks. Even that elevator music.
The elevator
So
music's
good.
pretty good. Yeah.
Dun, dun, da, 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 da. I would stay in that elevator, just hang out with Natalia
Right.
for a little while
Hold
before
on,
opening it
Natalia.
up.
Yeah, we have to listen to this.
So good. Any of these tracks, except for maybe like one or two, are very upper echelon. I love them.
Yeah, it's
It's
bangers.
amazing.
It's bangers front to back. Yeah.
Yeah. I had to agree with that. I had to bring that up again. So good. I don't even know which one is the best because like so many are just, oh, I remember this track so good.
Yeah. I mean, the pause menu one's the one that always just
The pause
comes to
menu.
mind when I think of the game. Obviously, everything
Yeah.
else is great too, but that's the one, right? Is that, oh, that pause menu music. This is the
Mm-hmm.
pause menu music. Really?
Yep.
Okay. Sure. Why not?
There was that recent viral, whatever,
I saw
TikTok,
the TikTok.
Instagram,
Yeah, I
whatever.
saw that where the guy's jamming.
I like that guy.
Yeah.
I even made my own sort of copy of that with the music for Gerudo Valley in Ocarina of
Oh,
Time.
nice. Oh, that's good.
You can find that on the Smashing Bricks Instagram if you're interested. Okay, what else can we talk about here? The sound effects you mentioned. I wanted to talk about that. The
Yeah.
bullets when you shoot like a machine gun. I read that
Mhm.
they had a set of like a dozen sounds or more that would just kind of randomly play as you were shooting with all the pew, ting, 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 you know?
Right. Yeah, yeah.
And that would just add to that John Woo effect as like little fragments
sure.
were falling off of the walls,
Mhm.
bullet holes were appearing everywhere, pieces of the boxes
Yeah.
were flying, and you had that sound going with it. So good.
Yeah,
Everything.
and like I said, the reload sound is just pure
Mhm.
perfection. I love it so much.
Here's another tidbit. I couldn't add all this in the history, so I was just saving it for now.
Yeah.
They considered doing this really cool thing with reloading. They wanted to have reloading activated by quickly removing the rumble pack and putting it back into the controller. That was
Really?
part of this crazy ambition of this newbie team.
Wow, I would expect that from Nintendo themselves, not this group of new I mean, it's the new developers doing whatever.
Yeah, so cool.
I guess that makes sense. They thought of that.
It didn't happen actually because Nintendo didn't like it. And I'm not sure why, but I can kind of imagine that maybe they felt like it was making it too real, too much like you're handling a gun.
Okay, yeah, with the controller already having the trigger to it, sure.
I thought that would be cool, but it also
Yeah,
might be
absolutely.
extra wear and tear on the controller that was already falling apart from your circles in Mario Party.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Oh yeah, rotating the stick, wearing a glove so you don't hurt yourself.
Yeah. Oh man. What else? More controls. The auto aim is sick.
Oh yeah, it's
I
really
loved
well
auto
done.
aim.
Yeah.
I felt like a straight up gunslinger. I felt like, what was that game? Splinter Cell Conviction.
Oh.
Much later game in like the teens, the 2010s, where you walk into a room and you mark all your enemies and then
yeah.
quickly press the button
Right.
and Sam Fisher kills them all. I could do that myself in GoldenEye
Right.
because the auto aim was so good.
It's so good, so generous. It's funny when I first loaded it up to do this, I honestly had not played it since probably 2000 would be my guess. Maybe '01. So, 20 plus years. And I was kind of struggling in the first level just on normal difficulty. And I wouldn't say it's a super easy game, but I wouldn't say it's hard on normal difficulty either. And I kept trying to use the reticule. I kept trying to, click the trigger, aim for headshots.
Oh God, never.
And it can be pretty slow because, you get stuck in place and they're just shooting at me and I'm trying to get the headshot. And then I just started shooting and I completely forgot there was auto aim in this game. And it is so powerful.
Yeah.
The game immediately became like, oh, I can play this game. This is not that bad. Versus if I try to get every headshot, which I'm sure some people can do, or your speedrunners, right? Or even you in your prime, 13 years old. But I was really struggling with it. So then I realized, oh, damn, this has really powerful auto aim. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah. Probably you'd want to turn auto aim off to be like the most precise headshotter.
Right.
Which I never did. But there were like little hacks that you could do with the game. I discovered this sort of partway through this play, really quickly though. Tilting down ever so slightly your view, pressing the top C button, so you're leaning ever so slightly down. Now your auto aim always picks up to sort of a level plane and you just tag everybody.
Oh.
And that kind of leads me to something about the C button controls. I think they're super underrated for maintaining your aim position. This might be why I was good at this and then was not great at standard dual stick shooter controls, because in your regular shooters, you're always using your right thumb to stabilize your aim, right? Wherever it is on screen.
Yeah.
In this game, you could lightly adjust your vertical on the C buttons and then kind of strafe side to side to adjust your horizontal, and your gun would just be pretty static in that position. So you could maintain it static up or static down and then manipulate your entire body, like your entire screen, so that the gun moved with it. And it's really strong for precision aiming if you get used to it. And I mean, sure, I played this game for 3 to 4 years straight when I was a kid. But I also played dual stick first person shooters, not as feverishly, but at least on and off, and pretty regularly early on there for like 15 years after this game. And I never got good with that. but I got really
Hmm.
good with the C button controls. So people are hating on it now, but I think if more people gave it a chance, they would realize that GoldenEye had really solid aiming. And I never used, or very rarely used, the R button where the reticle comes up,
Yeah.
because that's hard. That was hard.
Yeah, that's pretty sloppy when you try to use that. And I don't know, I guess since we're talking about controls, I understand what you're saying, but I mean, maybe it's just trying to play an N64 game in 2023 and for me, on a Switch controller, right? Because I was doing the Switch Online version.
With the stick as the C buttons?
Yes.
I would have mapped the C buttons to the face buttons and then used
I feel like that would be better, yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of strange using the right analog stick for it, so I guess I don't know what it would feel like with an N64 controller now because I don't have one, but it was an awkward feeling on the Switch controller. And I'm trying to think. I don't think you can remap on the N64 emulation on there.
They have built-in control schemes, like built into the game, where you can switch it, but they're all a little awkward.
There's something off about all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, like one of them, the C buttons would control your forward, back, and strafing, and then the left stick would be your looking, so the opposite of dual stick
swapping
shooters.
basically.
But actually, I wanted to tell you, on the Switch, and everyone listening, this is a workaround. On the Switch, go into the Switch menu and change your Switch to left-handed mode.
Oh.
Then go into GoldenEye and set your controls to, I forget what it's called. It might be Solitaire or Domino, but it's not the main one. And that gives you what I just said, where the C buttons are what would normally be your dual stick left analog, and the left analog is what would normally be your dual stick right analog. And since you swapped it in the Switch controls, now they are on the proper thumbs that you're used to for the past 20 years.
Right.
So there's a workaround.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's cool. I did not know about that. Yeah, that's neat, because I was struggling with the controls the whole time, even though I spent some time with it. So that's definitely... I can't say it's a knock against the game itself, because again, I haven't played it with an N64 controller in so long, but definitely the Switch version did not feel great controlling the game. So.
Yeah, I'd love it if you went back and tried that and just like sent me a message
I will
and
definitely
say
give
like
that a
how
shot.
it feels, because
I
I'm
wanna try that
curious
out.
about that myself.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But as far as the original controls, if I wanted to play it on the Switch in the most authentic way, or at least close to authentic, I would try to keep those face buttons as the C buttons and then just put like A on the right stick button, the push in the stick, and then reload on just one of the extra shoulder buttons, because you have 3 extra ones or 2 extra ones. Put it on an L2 or an R2.
Right, you're only using the one side for the one trigger, yeah.
Yeah, so controls were weird because they were pioneering. They were starting.
Yeah.
There were no right analog sticks.
Right.
There literally weren't. There was barely one analog stick. The Nintendo 64 was the first thumbstick. But anyway, so it's a little clunky, but still so much fun. I still can't. I can't knock the game for its controls, because I found myself running through the game really well, strafing, moving quickly, taking out enemies. It's incredible how I fell back into it. All right. So just a few more specific elements. One really big one, the multiplayer.
Of course.
Hello. The elephant in the room. We didn't get to play it. Or did you? You have the Switch version. Did you get to play multiplayer?
So yeah, my fiance and I tried just a bit, because I really wanted... My brother doesn't live super far from me, so I still at some point want to have him over and relive those old memories. We just didn't have a chance. But we played a little bit of split screen, and we were laughing quite a bit. We were having fun. We did, a slappers only match. We were back in the facility, checking out the bathroom stalls, finding the rocket launcher there, shooting at each other. It's definitely one of those cases where I'm more comfortable with first-person games compared to her, so it can be a little unfair in that sense. So I know she only wants to play so much because it's kind of tough if you keep dying. So
Yeah.
we didn't spend a ton of time with it, but it for such an old game, it was making us laugh and we were having fun the short time we did play it. So it definitely brought up some of those memories again of playing with my brother. But I think it still holds up in its own way. You're both at the, I don't know if disadvantage is the right word, but you're both at the mercy of the awkward controls. So it's a level playing field still, unless it's someone who's still playing it every day. You're both going to kind of fumble around with it and still manage to have some fun with it. So I enjoyed messing around with it a little bit.
That's cool. Do you play a lot of first-person shooters, or like at least a fair number in the last 20 years?
Yeah, I would say it's not at the top of my list of genres I'm the most familiar with or play all the time, but I usually play all the big ones. Like,
okay,
I played Halo Infinite last year. Doom Eternal I didn't beat, but I played a lot of it, and that one's really, really hard. And I did that with mouse and keyboard, so I've played my fair share of first-person shooters.
Nice. So I did remember GoldenEye feeling incredibly full-featured, robust, all the different weapon options, the sets of weapons that made each different setting feel almost like a different game. The different rules like slappers only, the license to kill, the golden gun, the living daylights, all that stuff. Do you feel like those things, the options and the breadth of the experience feels somewhat equivalent to more modern games still, or does it feel like it's old and lesser and just not as full-featured as modern shooters?
That's a really good question. So, when I was going back, because my memories of it, much like you are, it was a full suite of options, a lot of things you can change. But I think when you play it in 2023, I think it does feel limiting, or there are fewer options overall compared to modern games, I feel like. Because I think with a lot of modern games, you get variants that you can toggle. You get like full-on, completely different game modes, right? Not just here's a different set of weapons, or I know GoldenEye has, the golden gun, or like the limited lives one, or even the one where you're holding the flag, right? But I feel like there are full-on game modes that are just completely different in modern games. And I don't know that GoldenEye has that when you think about it in the modern context. So it's not to the point where I felt like there's nothing we can change when we try this, when I played with my fiance, but I don't think it holds up to a lot of modern shooters. I think it is pretty limiting comparatively.
So it has aged a lot, but at the time, it was better than anything,
though, absolutely. It was revolutionary in that sense, especially again on consoles. I'm sure there were some PC shooters that maybe had a lot of toggles, but I wouldn't have known because I wasn't playing those. So
yeah. The first big one that I remember as far as multiplayer deathmatch was the original Counter-Strike. That wasn't out until 2000.
Okay, so a few years later.
So, came soon, but that really took the first-person shooter world by storm.
Right. I feel like Quake was pretty big with multiplayer too. Maybe Quake 2 I'm not sure when Quake 2 came out, but I feel like that was the big multiplayer one.
Yeah, Quake was
because Quake
huge.
1 had the campaign and like the Trent Reznor soundtrack, so I think a lot of people played that for the single player too, whereas I feel like Quake 2 was the big, like, oh my god, online multiplayer is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, Quake and Quake 2 were definitely some of the biggest first-person shooters, and they have their, forever followings, and then going on to Quake 3, throughout that series. And Quake 2 was also that same year. I don't think I mentioned it before, which is weird, but Quake 2 came out in 1997 also, now that I think about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, those were huge and probably the leaders, but for console players, we didn't really know all about that at the time.
Right, and that was a big divide back then, right? Versus now, I have a bunch of consoles and I have a really good desktop, or, I even have a Steam Deck now, which is almost like a computer, right? So I think that's how it is now versus, back in 97, if you weren't playing Doom or Quake, GoldenEye 007 was revolutionary to you.
Even having a computer in the mid-90s was
Sure.
not super common. You know, it wasn't like
Right.
everyone just had 3 computers in their house.
Right, there you go. Yeah.
What are a couple other things? We're almost done here, but there are a couple things that I just really wanted to mention. The pause screen you mentioned with the music, but also the layout of it was super cool.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
Bond's watch. It showed your
The
health.
fuzzy screen effect. Yeah.
Yep. You got your health, your body armor, all your weapons on the next screen, all your objectives listed. So
Very
cool.
sleek.
Wait, and like
Yeah.
when you pressed pause, it didn't just go straight to it. He pulled out his other hand
He
and
pulled
put it
up
up to the screen.
he pulled up the watch. Oh, yeah, that's so good.
Cool. Another moment for me that is super memorable is right in that first level where you find the sniper rifle at the top of the first tower, and you're like, okay, I'll use this. It's a sniper rifle. Holy wow, I can zoom in across the whole world here.
Right.
That was incredible.
Yeah.
And then dual wielding. When you got a second gun.
I was going to bring it up if you didn't. Yeah.
When you killed an enemy who was dual wielding and you already had that gun, you would get a second gun.
Yeah.
Which is like weird because you should be able to dual wield every time you pick up a second gun. But
right.
But
yeah,
it was
that's
fun.
a strange restriction, but still.
They made it special.
Yeah.
And it
it's
really
memorable.
was powerful.
It's a huge power increase. Yeah, once you have a second one, you're just mowing down enemies at that point.
Honestly, one of my favorite weapons in the game is 2 DD-44 Dustove pistols. Just like the second pistol
interesting,
that's
yeah.
super loud. It just has a really good sound, and it looks cool because you see the slide reciprocating back on both of them, and you shoot them in alternate, and the shells are flying, and just 2 handguns is super cool.
I feel like that's the ultimate John Woo expression, right?
Exactly.
Here's my 2 handguns back and forth, right?
Yeah. Really cool. Any other things like that are really super memorable moments for you, or that came back this time playing that were super cool?
Playing with the big heads was very fun to go back to. I forgot about that. Or even just cheat codes in general. I never think about cheat codes anymore. And I was playing it. I was probably playing it a few days, and I randomly thought, "Oh, I almost guarantee this has cheat codes." So I looked it up, and there you go. There's even an article on how to input them on the Switch controller. So I was in the menu, activating cheat codes, invincibility, big heads, all guns, and just messing around with that a little bit one of the days. So that was a nice blast from the past, from when you could just put in a cheat code.
Wait a sec. You could just activate those things by doing button combos on the Switch version?
As you were talking about completing everything on the highest difficulty to unlock those, I thought you could just go in the menu and do them.
What?
They're very long combinations, but absolutely.
That was not in the original.
No, I'm pretty sure it is, because I feel like that's what I did. Because I know there were Game Sharks and stuff like that, but I don't think I used one for GoldenEye.
Oh my goodness. That is something that completely flew over my head, if that's true.
Yeah, and you have to hold. There's a lot of holding one key and pressing the other. So for my Switch controller, it was hold left bumper and do C stick or C button right. Or, okay, now you have to hold both bumpers and hit the left D-pad button. So I'm not sure what it would be like on an N64 controller, but I'm almost positive the original had the cheat codes as well.
Yeah, I remember just having to beat every single level in a certain amount of time on a certain difficulty to unlock them. And then you could go into the menu and toggle them on and off.
So, okay, I think that's where the difference is. So to even get the cheat code menu, you do have to beat, I don't know if it's a specific level or any level, you have to beat one of them on the target time, which I did. Which one did I do? There was an easy one. Oh,
like the runway.
The runway one.
Yeah.
Runway, yes. I beat runway in probably 30 seconds, and then that unlocked the cheat menu, and then at that point you could put in whatever code you want.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You could also activate them with a Game Shark. I had a Game Shark when I had a Nintendo 64, and the very best code for Game Shark was a method to unlock portions of the level that were built but inaccessible. And this was done by pressing the button on the front of the Game Shark cartridge. There was one little hard plastic button. And when you press that, this crazy powerful bullet would shoot out from like your chest from the middle of nowhere. And you could take out the other players and the enemies if you use this also, but that's not what it was for. I would use it in multiplayer and walk up to a certain door, like in the archives or in the facility or in the caverns or whatever, and press the button, and it would destroy the locked door as if it were just like a wooden crate. And then you could simply walk through there and play your multiplayer game in a much bigger multiplayer area. And that was the most fun to use because it was like getting some new extra game added to your game.
That's incredible. I did not know that existed. Wow.
Yeah. That was one of my favorite things about playing multiplayer GoldenEye.
Yeah.
All right. So that covers a lot of it. There's so much more we could say, but I think maybe we should move on to our final thoughts, which seem pretty obvious at this point. So at the end of every episode, we like to look back on our time playing the game and decide if it was worth our time and if we think it would be worth anyone else's time. And we say whether the game was more of a smash or more of a brick. So what would you call GoldenEye 007 for the Nintendo 64?
I would definitely say a smash. There are certainly some archaic parts of it. This is a game from 1997, a 3D game from 1997. But I think I can look beyond the controls. I can look beyond maybe some of the limitations with multiplayer modes nowadays. Because I think at the heart of it, and I've mentioned a few times, playing it in 2023, I felt like James Bond. I felt like the objective structure of the game and of the difficulty. What a great way to deal with difficulty, to make it objective based. I think those things are so forward thinking that still holds up in 2023. So even if I'm fumbling a little bit with controls, or if there's some level design spots that are maybe a little hard to parse, where the geometry looks a little bit the same, or it's easy to get lost, I feel like it still succeeds in the sense that it feels like a great James Bond video game, and that objective-based structure feels fresh even in 2023. So I think it's definitely worth visiting for the first time, or even revisiting for those who've played it before.
I agree. With almost no caveats, I call this a smash. Totally worth going back. I was not disappointed. I had a lot of fun. This game is fantastic, and I recommend it to anyone. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and I think possibly, if I look at games at any given moment, this may have been my most favorite game at the time that it was my favorite game, if that makes any sense. Like now my favorite games are the Dark Souls games, but
but your passion for GoldenEye
was peak. Yeah, in the late 90s.
I hear you on that. That's awesome.
So full on smash. That's from both of us. And anyone listening, if you haven't played it already to prepare for listening to this episode, do go back and play it. Please go back and play it. Such a good game.
Yes, please do.
Warms my heart that it even exists. And I love what you said in that last part, like about how it was very forward thinking. And I just thought these guys didn't even realize that they couldn't do the things that they did. And that's how they did them.
Blind ambition can be very powerful, yes.
No one was there to say, no, people don't do this.
Right.
And that's basically the story of GoldenEye, is a bunch of guys who didn't know what they couldn't do, so they did it.
Yeah, so they did it.
Amazing.
And here we have it.
Well, that's it. That's GoldenEye. Thanks, Anthony. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Yeah, this was fantastic. I loved this trip down memory lane.
Yeah, I'm glad we picked this game. And I'm sure we'll see you again, hear you again back on the show.
Definitely.
Where can people find you, if anywhere?
So I'm at AM LaBella on Twitter. I usually post about video games every now and again. Thinking about getting back into writing on a blog maybe, so keep an eye out for that if you're interested.
Yeah, and you'll let people know on the Twitter.
Definitely.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
And as for us, it's the same old, same old. Find us wherever fine podcasts are given away for free. You're probably listening to it on one of those right now. You can also follow me on Instagram at Smashing Bricks, Twitter smashing_bricks, and you can email smashingbrickspodcast@gmail.com with any commentary you have on any past game or any game coming up. And I encourage you all to play along in the days and weeks leading up to our games, so that if you don't have any recent experience with the game, you now will, and you can really relate to our nostalgic trip down memory lane each time. And for our next episode, I'll be having a returning guest once again. It will be Sadie Flayeh, and we will be playing our newest game yet, Super Mario Sunshine. So look out for that.
Ooh, that'll be a good one. Nice.
Yeah, play along, Anthony. You can get it on
I
the
will.
Switch.
I will. I haven't played it in a while. Yeah.
They have the 3D anthology.
I have the
whatever it's
3D
called.
collection.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I might join for that and play along.
Awesome. I actually love it because I just finished Super Mario Odyssey, and I happen to have a lesser opinion of that than The World. So going back to an older one will be very interesting.
Yeah. Good compare and contrast.
Finally, check out the Smashing Bricks Retro Games list, or the SBRGL, which is linked in the show's description. That shows all the games that we have played and what our verdicts were, as well as a huge list of games that are future options for future episodes. If you see something there that you would love to play or love to listen to a discussion about, send an email in to smashingbrickspodcast@gmail.com. Or if there is a game that is not on the list and you would like to see on the list, send it to that same email address. All right, so that's it. That's what will be on the agenda for next time. Until then, thanks again, Anthony.
Thank you.
My name is Eddie Inzauto. Thank you, listeners, for listening. And until next time, may the nostalgia be with you. That's the music's going to come in right there. It's going to be so f***ing hyped.
Nice. That's going to be the most epic intro ever.
Yep.